Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How y'all doing out there? We have, this is Sean P. Experience on YouTube. We have right now one of my favorite biography writers of all times. I got to say that. Having a real fan moment. I've been waiting for this show for a long time. So glad and honored he said yes and agreed to come to the show. I have Jonathan Eig. How you doing, sir?
Good, Sean. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on the show.
Man, it's more than an honor for myself. Let me give you a proper introduction first, and then we'll go into the bells and whistles. So I have the full-time New York Times bestselling author of Ali. We have the National Book Award nominee. We have the Amazon Best Bio of 2023. New York Times bestseller with King. We have Barack Obama's favorite, right? He made that list. And
Yep.
the top 10 book of the year for the Washington Post, I have Jonathan Eig once again. Man, I love to ask my authors this question. I rattle off all of these accolades, right? Now, we know in the sports world, it's very visceral their response. When they get an award, the rookie of the year, it's like you can tell the excitement. But in the writing world, it's kind of like a kind of a humble, like tennis, right? Like, golf. So give me your real emotions when your team call you on the phone, like, look, Barack Obama said, give me your real response as a
Yeah,
human being.
I was at the gym with my daughter. We are working out, and she said, "Hey,"
Yes, sir.
she's looking at her phone, and she said, "Hey, Barack Obama just put you on his list for his favorite books of the year." I said, "What?" She said, "No." She showed me on her phone. I wasn't exactly jumping all around, but I was really excited. And if you can
Man.
impress the 20-year-old daughter, then you're doing something right. It definitely impressed her.
Yes, sir. Yes. Oh man, these are monumental moments, right? So I wanna jump right into it, man. When it comes to a book like King, and also your book on Muhammad Ali, I want to show that for the audience. I got my little pop ups here. Give me 1 second. I love this cover, man. I love this shot. I love that Ali shot. It's so
Yeah, it's a
classy.
great picture.
My first time seeing the bookstore was like, I gotta get this book. Like, wow, I gotta just grab it, right? Um, writing Ali, writing King, and then you have your book Opening Day, right? You've written some larger than life figures. These people are well written about, well documented, tons of books, movies, everything. What gives you the confidence and the courage? Like, you know what? I'm gonna say something else about this person. What gives you that kind of a confidence?
Well, part of it is that I've been writing for a long time. I've been, started out as a newspaper reporter. I've written thousands of newspaper stories, and I worked my way up to the feeling like maybe I could try writing a book. And the first book I wrote was a biography of Lou Gehrig, and I was scared out of my mind because I never wrote a book before, and I didn't know if I had the right to tell Lou Gehrig's story. You have to earn it. So it took me like 3.5, 4 years to write that book, and by the time I was done, I thought, all right, now I know how to write a book. Now I got to try it for a harder one because you just got to keep pushing yourself. So I did Jackie Robinson, I did Al Capone, I did, as you mentioned, Muhammad Ali, and I just keep, I'm always afraid. Like, do I really have the guts to do this? Do I really have the talent to do this? Can I, who am I to tell the stories of these hugely important figures? I grew up with Muhammad Ali. He was like the most famous man in the world when I was a kid, and the thought that I could write his biography was, terrifying. Really, like, but I feel like it's such a big honor and it's such a big responsibility that I just can't screw it up. I have to really push myself and work hard. Really cover every base, talk to every single person, call everybody in his yearbook, track down every little detail. And that's why these books take, now they take at least 5, 6 years because they're getting harder and maybe I'm getting slower.
So whenever you come to your publisher, like, look, I'm gonna write King. What's their response to when you say that I'm gonna write this next? Are they kind of like, man, come on, man, you can't do King? Or is it like a lot of pushback, or what is it?
Usually, almost any time you pitch something, there's questions like why. What are you going to say that's different? Why do we need another book on King? What's going to make this one stand out? What have you got to prove? What have you got to show us that you've got something new? So then I have to do the research. I have to do enough research just to sell the book. I got to be able to say, listen, I got Harry Belafonte, Jesse Jackson, John Lewis talking to me. I got his barber from Montgomery talking to me. I got 3,000 pages of new FBI documents. I've got, and you run down the list and you say, and I haven't even started yet. So give me 5 more years and I'm going to get even more. So that's kind of how you pitch
Mm.
it to them, and you try to get them excited about it.
So with that being said, once you pitch and convince them, convincing us, the readers, is pretty much like that's nothing. You
Well,
convince
no,
them.
it's still hard, but I do know that I have to convince my publisher before I've done all the work, which is tricky because I don't know what I'm going to find. Then you give me 5 years to write the book, and I come up with lots more material. I know I've got something good, and then you just have to hope that the readers discover it and that they come to it. But you never really know.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So normally, I love asking my guests about their research process, and these books are they have like 558 endnotes in King, which is
Yeah.
ridiculous. But I want to ask you more about your writing process. Like you've gathered 5 years of research. How do you condense it down to like beautiful writing, and the stories are so like vivid and detailed, and they were eating this and they were drinking this, and it rained that day. I'm like, how you know it rained that day? Like, how you still make all this stuff to beautiful writing, right?
Well, we could talk for days about that, Sean. It's that's the most important part of the process. I gathered thousands and thousands of pages of research materials. I've got hundreds of hours of interviews. What do you decide to put in the book, and what do you leave out? Because they used to tell us in journalism school, the quality of every story you write is in direct proportion to the amount you leave out, which means like you've done so much research that you know everything about your subject, but you're only going to put the best facts in. And even though this book is pretty thick, it's like 650 pages, same as yours. Oh, you got a lot of notes there. That's impressive. It could have been twice as thick. I could have written 3 volumes. There was one point at which I said to my editor, I've got so much stuff on the Montgomery bus boycott that nobody's ever seen before. So much new material that I want to do. I want to do a whole book just on Montgomery. Let's divide this book up into three portions. We'll issue 3 volumes, and the first volume will go through Montgomery. The second volume will go up to Selma, right? And he said, "Oh no, definitely not. We're not going to do that." And he was right. He was right. Because we want people to read the book. I want people to cry when they get to the end of this book for
Yeah,
when we lose King,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
they're not gonna stick around for 3,000 pages. You have to be disciplined. So that's really the trick: is being disciplined and knowing what to leave out and knowing which details matter. Because I could have told you so much more, but I'm trying to be selective. I'm trying to make sure that I don't lose you along the way.
And back to the beauty of your writing style. Even the Ali book, I found myself, even though it's big like that, I'm flying through it because the writing is grabbing you. And even in our reading group, Celestially Yours and Raymond had the buddy read for King. I want to give them props for that. But people in the chat, there are no spoilers for a biography. I always say that. We know how it's going to end, right?
Right.
But leading up to the back of the book, people are getting emotional. People are getting anxiety. Like you know where this is going, right? How do you keep on capturing that, even though we know where it's going? Like
Yeah,
I
that's one
think
of the
it's
tricks about writing a biography is that, or writing really any history book, how it ends. So the writer has to, and the reader kind of make an agreement. Like, we're going to pretend you don't know how this ends. Come with me on this journey. Trust me to tell you the story. And I really hope that as you're reading that last chapter, you're on the edge of your seat. You don't know, like you've fallen into the story to such a degree that you've forgotten that he's going to be killed on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, because it feels like he might be killed the day before, the week before, the month before, because there's so much pressure on him. And I'm turning up the tension to the point where you can't put the book down. If I've done my job, you can't put the book down in that last chapter.
no, no. So you mentioned the cutting room floor, as they say in the movie world, the cutting room. Give us something, if you can, that's not in the book that you wish could have made the book. What's on the floor that you wish was there?
Well, there's a lot of great stuff that happened the last year of his life. And I was just saying that I really want to keep you on the edge of your seat. So, I left out a lot of great speeches, a lot of great sermons that he gave in the last year of his life. But there's other stuff too. There's a lot of stuff about people like around him who I could have stopped and told you more about. I wish I could have told you more about Jim Bevel or even Ralph Abernathy. But, some of these people who were really important and really fascinating people, I had to, keep their stories short. I'll give you one good example. I opened originally my first draft of the book. I opened with the story of Martin Luther King's father, going into town with his father to sell cotton, and getting beat up, really getting harassed and mistreated by the white landowner who they sharecropped for. And that was how I was going to open the book, with that scene. And I ended up taking it out and not using it at all. And that was a tough choice because it's a really powerful scene. But I decided I wanted to open the book with King's grandmother instead of his grandfather, because the women have often been ignored in these stories. And King's grandmother is really his more important spiritual ancestor. She's the one who never lost faith. She's the one who still believed in God, even though she was treated so badly on earth. She never lost sight of who she really was. And I think that was my decision. I wanted to open the book with his grandmother instead of his grandfather.
Wow, wow. So let me ask you a question. You mentioned in the book, I can't remember the exact date. So I believe that the FBI or whoever, they're going to release all these documents. It's coming up pretty soon. Will you do like a continuation, like an updated King with all this new stuff? Or you pretty much like, you know what? I wrote it. I'm done with it. Let you guys have at it. What's your opinion about that?
No, I never abandon my books. If there's something to be updated, I'll update it. I'll keep writing about it. If there's something newsworthy in those FBI documents that are scheduled to be released in 2027, I'll be on top of it. And if they're really important, I'll update the book. But at the very least, I guarantee you, I will be one of the first people in line to get those documents when the FBI releases them. They're going to release the audio tapes of the King surveillance in 2027, and I will be I'll be waiting and listening, and I feel like I have a responsibility to my readers and to keep the book up to date. And now with ebooks, you can update them instantly, but if there's something super important, we'll print a new edition of the book with that updated information.
Wow. Okay. Okay. I was very curious about that when I was reading that in the book. I'm like, I wonder if he's gonna try to update this big old thick book that we have and bump it up. Yeah.
Maybe it'll just depend on what's on those tapes. It could be that we've got the worst of it already, and that there's nothing really to be added except the sound. But we've already read the transcripts. In that case, it might not be that much of a revelation. But it also could be, and it could work either way. It could be hard for us to hear King, talking with women, and it could be heartbreaking to hear him in hotel rooms with women. It also could be that we discovered that the FBI exaggerated a lot of what they said they heard in those hotel rooms and on those phone calls, and that the tapes reveal that they were that the FBI was making up or exaggerating some of this stuff. So that will be important too.
Yes, it will be. Yes, it will be. I was thinking about his early, but before I move on to that, right? You mentioned how many things you have that's put on to the side. So whenever you authors are putting these things to the side, do you like just delete it? Do you like just trash it? Like what happens to this stuff? Is my question. I've never asked anybody that before.
That's a good question. Well, I certainly keep the files, and someday, somebody else if you want to come along and write a King book, you can come and go through my file cabinets. You're welcome to anytime. That goes to, for any scholar, any writer.
Y'all heard it. You just offered it. I'm going to Chicago. I love Chicago. I love their pizza.
King of Life, the remix by Sean Polidor. That's cool. But also, the chapters that I wrote that I ended up not using, or the pages that I wrote that are not using, I suppose I'll, I don't delete them. They're still on my hard drive, and I'll have to think about how I archive that stuff so that maybe, I don't know if I want people to read the stuff that didn't go in the book, because some of it I took out because it wasn't good enough. So I don't know if I want people to read it, but I have to think about that. It's a good question.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much. You spoke on King's his grandmother and everything like that. I want to talk about the early part of King life, the first part of the book, because for me, reading about King so much for years, I think the first part of the book is kind of more surprising to me, all the fine details. Let's talk about the perfect storm that made him who he was, like the particular neighborhood he grew up in, and his parents, the grandparents, his early love of words, and his mental acumen. Talk about some of the early parts that made him who he became, on the backside. Talk about that.
It really was a perfect storm. I think I like the way you put it, because he comes from, he's a black kid growing up in the South. He's certainly aware of racism and the Jim Crow laws, but he's also a little bit protected from it, right? He's middle class. His father's a preacher, can't be fired for speaking out. So and he's growing up in probably the best street to live on in all of America if you're black. Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, where there's black owned businesses, there's churches everywhere. It's a really strong community. So he's got all of these role models around him, and he's got, Morehouse and these other colleges, just down the block. So really inspiring characters all around him, great black teachers at his disposal. So he has opportunities that, a lot of poor people wouldn't have had. And he's got this huge ambition because of all he's been exposed to. So he's got, visiting preachers and scholars coming to his dinner table every night. This is a kid who's really sees that big things are expected of him. And as you said, he's reading and learning big words. He says that he thinks of big words as being like treats from his grandma's oven, that they're meant to be shared, right, and enjoyed. And he goes around the community showing off his big words, and he practices preaching in front of the mirror when he's 5-6 years old. He practices baptizing the pets, and doing funerals for dead birds in the backyard. So he's clearly a kid who's got a lot of potential. He tries to sneak into kindergarten a year early, and then he skips a bunch of grades in elementary school. So I think we see really very quickly. That doesn't mean he's going to become something special, but the ingredients are there.
Yes, right. Because I try to, we'll go into Malcolm X later on in the interview, but I tried in my mind to switch. What if Malcolm X grew up in that middle class kind of environment and those things around him? What would he have become? And what if Martin would have been in Malcolm's shoes and losing his dad early and all the adversity Malcolm had early? How that would have been, to juxtapose that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Think about what Malcolm went through compared to what King went through. It says a lot. And a lot of the civil rights activists, and I think King felt guilt about this because he knew a lot of the people he was working with, a lot of people he was going to school with were people who'd struggled and had a much harder time than he did. And I think he felt some guilt about it. But, like he's driving around in college in this nice brand new car, he's kind of spoiled. But maybe that makes him work harder because he feels like he has to, prove himself to a lot of the people around him.
Right. Yes, sir. I want to go into King's, of course, his speaking ability. He's going to be one of the greatest speakers of all time in a lot of people's category. But let's go back to what made him into that, because some people say, well, he was plagiarizing stuff, and he was borrowing stuff. They kind of try to just brush it off, but the things he was able to pull off, I don't think many people in the world could pull off, even with him plagiarizing or whatever you want to call it. Like, he had a special thing, going to some of his oratory ability, if you will.
Yeah, I think the like anybody who's like off the charts brilliant, they don't necessarily think the normal rules apply to them, but also King sees himself as walking in this new space. He's a preacher's kid and he wants to be a preacher, but he's also an intellectual. He wants to go to college and get a PhD. He wants to be a president of Morehouse someday. So he doesn't feel like he has to fit into any one box, especially when he's young. So plagiarism is not really something he even thinks about. It's pretty well known that he plagiarized his doctoral dissertation, large chunks of it. But the interesting thing to me was that he wasn't even really trying to hide it. He plagiarized from another kid who went to the same school, who wrote for the same advisor, and just a few years earlier. So if you're trying to hide it, you don't do that. And even in high school, he plagiarized a speech that he entered in a contest, and he plagiarized it from a book that was in the school library called 50 Great Speeches for student speakers, right? So I think because he's a preacher's kid, he knows that preachers borrow from other preachers all the time. And it's flattery. It's not theft, it's flattery. And you make it your own, and you bring your own style to it. And that's a way of saying that, hey, that guy gave a great sermon. I'm gonna use it, and he'll be, it's like covering someone else's song. And I think that, when he got into the academic world, somebody should have said, "Hey, you can't do that. That's not how it works in college." But nobody ever busted him on it, so I think he didn't really care.
Because going into like his adult life with the famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and of course you've read those books about that speech specifically. They break down where he possibly borrowed from, and they're showing you side by side documents of what he said versus what was written, and you see what he did to still do it on the podium in real time with 250,000 or more people, and be able to in his mind decide to ad lib and not use this. I'm gonna take from that and change
Yeah,
the cadence and delivery and the flow. They break down all of it. His
that,
pauses and
yeah,
things he's doing so many things in that moment that the average person just can't do, whether you're borrowing or not. It's still
that's right.
a masterclass in speaking.
I agree, and that's a great example of what we're talking about here, because so he gives this speech that he's written out, and it's okay. It's a pretty good speech. It's really radical, but it's not poetry. It's not kind of a soaring oratory that King is famous for. And when he gets to the end of the written stuff, he just decides that it's time to go to church, and that's when he calls on his old patterns, his old habits, and you could call it plagiarism, sure, maybe, because a lot of it, the "I Have a Dream" speech, had been done by another preacher. A lot of it came straight from Langston Hughes, the great poet, and he had done the same sermon himself a couple times before. So is that plagiarism? Is that like imitation? Sure, maybe, but what it is a great sermon that moves the masses, and he's not worried about literary credit. He's worried about moving the masses. He's worried about saving souls, saving the soul of the nation, and that's more important than footnotes.
Right. I compare it to like a hip hop artist, right? We see some guys and they freestyle, and it seems like they're on the spot making up things in real time, but sometimes they have other songs they've written in the past, and they're taking some bars from here, they're taking some bars from there, and they're combining it to where it's seamless, and you thinking like, wow, he just rapped 10 minutes straight without stopping. And it's still a level of brilliance to that. It's not taken away from the brilliance and the genius of doing that.
Oh hell no! If I could give one speech in my lifetime that was half as good as anything King did, I wouldn't care where it came from or who I borrowed from. Like that's a gift. He had a talent like no one else.
And you're a sports guy following these sports figures. I'm not condoning cheating at all, right? But if you see a guy taking steroids, for example, to still be able to hit a fastball 90 something miles an hour, you hitting 500 plus home runs, like you can't take a shot or a pill to give you the ability to do that. That's still something to be
Yeah,
said about
Barry
your raw
Bonds was
gift.
still Barry Bonds was still super talented. He was just stronger because of the pills, but the talent was within him
The talent,
all
right?
along.
Right.
Yeah.
The raw talent, right? Um, let's go into. We gotta go into this. This is probably the juiciest part of the whole book, right? In a lot of our book club, we were ranting and raving on these points. Let's go into the relationship with Martin Luther King Jr., of course, and Miss Coretta Scott King. And just from the beginning, from their dating phases throughout their marriage, of course, we know about a lot of the things that King was doing and some of the not so flattering reports of King's life. Talk about uncovering some of those things and what that was like for you as you were coming across documents and conversations. What it was like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was hard and it was sad to see, what a player he could be. But Coretta knew it all along, and that's the thing. Like when they started dating, everybody in town knew that he was dating a lot of women, and she talked about it. She said that she noticed that when they went to parties, all the women there seemed to know him already. Like you couldn't miss that. And she had to say, "What's up?" And he would say, "Well, don't worry, you're the only one I care about." But he was still dating other women in Boston, even when he started dating Coretta. And one of the things I discovered that was shocking to me was on these tapes that Coretta made. She started working on her memoir, 1968, after the assassination, and she recorded all these interviews with her ghostwriter. And on one of these tapes, she said something that didn't make it into the book. She said that when they were engaged, she caught him with another woman, with an old girlfriend in Atlanta, that he basically snuck out of the house one night and went to see her. So that was while they were engaged. So she made up her mind that she could accept that, she could forgive him. and so she knew who she was marrying. I think that's the thing. And she knew that this was going to be a struggle. And she still loved him and still felt like it was the right thing to do. That I think she believed that even if he cheated, that she was the most important woman in his life. And not just because she was the mother of his children. I mean, that's only a small part of it. It's because she was his intellectual partner and she inspired him. Even from the first date, she was the one who really had more experience as an activist. She was the one who was telling him books he needed to read. And I think he really valued that. Even if he didn't always treat her right, I think he valued it.
So back to you as a writer, coming across these findings and trying to decide, okay, book, what am I going to say and what am I not going to say? Like, how did you go about weeding that out? Did it take your editors and your publishers, or was it like your own conscience? Like, nah, I don't want to say that about King.
Well, it's
What was
mostly
that
me.
struggle?
The struggle is like, you don't want to sensationalize it. You don't want people to read this book and think that I'm just into the gossip and that I'm, trying to be salacious. I'm trying to really contextualize, and I'm trying to be as really as I want to downplay it as much as possible while being fair. And I want you to understand the relationship between Martin and Coretta. It's very important that we understand how complicated, how messed up it was in a lot of ways, and how brave she is for sticking with him, and for knowing her own importance, even when he didn't seem to show that he respected her in every way. She knew her own importance. The other thing is that, like, I thought it was important to include the details about his extramarital affairs, not just because it shows that he's human and that, he made mistakes and behaved badly, but also because that's what the FBI seized on to try to destroy him. And you can't leave that out if you want to tell the whole story of the FBI's campaign against King. So, I think you have to be careful, and you have to be sure not to sensationalize. And, I don't want to be accused of like gossiping and trying to like tear down his image. But you have to be honest too.
Yeah, yeah. And let's go into that, right? Because the most important parts of the first couple pages of the book, we're talking about trying to reimagine King, and he's been so sanitized and whitewashed and almost made to be like a demigod versus a mortal man. And some folks, they read the book or they hear certain things and they thinking like it diminishes his value. But to me, understand how much of an actual everyday guy he is, trying to do an extraordinary thing, made me respect him and admire him even more, not less. Right. So talk about the importance of the reimagine the real Dr. King.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I was hoping that readers would react that way, but you never know. Like, I thought it was possible that people would just say, no, I don't want to read a book about the flawed King. I prefer to keep my mental image of this, perfect icon, right? The
Yeah.
monument. I'll stick with the monument. I'll stick with the holiday, and I don't want to hear about the fact that he cheated on his wife. But I do think that part of the goal for this book was to remind people that he was human, that he had feelings, that he overcame his failures, he overcame his depression, he overcame his flaws, and that makes him a greater hero. And the fact that he was human just means we can all relate to him a little better if we let ourselves. So that was a really important part of this book for me.
Yeah. And you talking about King like smoking, right? The simple
Yeah,
thing, King smoking or drinking or just
yeah,
taking part in certain things. Me being in my age, coming from the '80s and everything, where King has put it to us like you would think the man didn't drink water. You would think the man didn't even eat a cheeseburger. Like you just thinking this perfect thing. Like wait, he smoked cigarettes? Wait, he did what? Like it's just your mind can't wrap around it because we were given this certain image that it does us no good to see him like that. He got to be seen as a person for us to understand his real struggle he had with this whole thing, man.
yeah. And it was important for him to try to convey this image of perfection and
Yeah.
respectability, because he was standing up for the whole community, and he had a job to do, and he needed to, that's why he dressed so conservatively. When he was young, he would wear flashier clothes, but once he became famous, he felt like he has to convey a certain image. So he started dressing much more conservatively, and he didn't want people to see him smoking in public, that kind of thing. So, but I think we can handle the truth.
I have an off the cuff, just came to my mind question I want to put, but a conversation, right? So Dr. King and MLK, just real briefly, people talk so bad about Malcolm, but he's the one that didn't smoke, didn't drink. Like they said when they did the autopsy, like his body was so clean on the inside, literally. But
Yeah.
Martin had the heart of like a 60-year-old, 70-year-old person. Like
Right.
he was the one that was actually more run down. And
Yeah,
then
it's true.
Malcolm didn't really face the physical things that Martin. But Martin was he was assaulted so many. I never realized he was assaulted so many times. He was punched and hit and stabbed
punched
and
and kicked,
kicked
stabbed in the chest.
so many
Yeah,
times. Like
yeah, he had a tough life, and
it's so opposite
it is
the
true. It's a
actual
good
life
point.
versus perception.
No, it's a really good point. Malcolm was, obviously his life was in danger, and his home was bombed too. So they have that in common. But I think you're right that in many ways, King went through a harder time physically and certainly suffered more abuse than Malcolm, and also, as you said, was less disciplined when it came to taking care of his body.
Let's go into Dr. King's health a little bit. Talk about that because, like you said, the depression. Whenever he was a child, the suicide attempt, right? Um, Hospitalized for exhaustion, and he had this crazy. I'm glad you put in the book this crazy schedule he was keeping, all this traveling and the lectures, speeches. There's so many things weighing on him. Talk about his health and just what that was for him.
Yeah, we should start by reminding people that he was very sensitive. Like as a kid, as you pointed out, he attempted suicide twice as a teenager. He's just a very sensitive kid. He really didn't like confrontation, didn't like getting into arguments, always wanted to be a pleaser. And it's funny to think about, he's this great protester, but he doesn't like arguments. He doesn't like conflict. That just goes to show that, he was overcoming his own anxieties to do what he did. And then, knowing that you're under constant threat of death, that the Klan is out there, the government is out there trying to destroy you, to go on with that. So he was exhausted all the time. He was hospitalized many times for what he called exhaustion and others called depression. And it was a while. Oh, you still there? Okay. But I can't hear you now. You're muted.
Yeah,
okay.
it froze for a little minute. Can you go back 2 minutes?
Okay. Yeah. I was just saying that, he had all of these health issues, and there was a time where he was hospitalized for exhaustion. He had these bad bouts of hiccups that he was treated for. Yeah. If you read the newspaper stories, you'll see lots of times when he's on the road giving these speeches, he has to stop and be examined by doctors because he's got these strange symptoms. He's losing his voice. He's just worn out. Harry Belafonte. What did I think of? Harry Belafonte said to me that that when you were close up to King and you were with him privately in a quiet room, you could hear that he had a little bit of a tick, like this constant little swallowing thing that he did, almost like a hiccup. And it was there for years. And one day, Belafonte noticed that it was gone, and he asked King, what happened to that little hiccup, that little tick? And King said, "Oh, it finally went away." And Belafonte said, "How did it go away?" And King said, "It went away when I made peace with my own death."
That's a crazy answer, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. And making peace with his own death. Once again, going through the book, I didn't realize before the assassination, like how many times he almost died. Like
Yeah.
how many times somebody wanted to bomb them and something happened, or they were like waiting, it got botched or something like that. I didn't realize how many times he was
Yeah.
doing it.
Um, I don't know how he got up every morning and did what he did, and not just the threat of assassination, which was real. It was the South Klan was out there, and they were trying several times, but also just knowing that any day could be the day that you wake up and see that the FBI has released the tapes of your hotel rooms, and the newspaper has decided to print the story.
Yes.
Getting up with that every day, so the stress this guy was under is just extraordinary.
Sheesh. And once again, to think about it, he got his PhD so young. He can lead any church he wants, probably. They can go and live anywhere. Like, he didn't have to do this.
That's right.
It's like being what they call the reluctant Messiah. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he didn't really have to go through this. Like, he struggled with get the Nobel Peace Prize, and it's kind of like, man, now I got to do it. Like, the
Yeah.
opposite reaction was to get. It's not what you think
Yeah.
you're going to have.
He's 26 years old when the Montgomery bus boycott starts. And then at 27, he writes a letter to his college professor and says, what am I supposed to do now? They're going to be expecting me to perform miracles for the rest of my life. I don't know what to do. He was just, he was so young, and there was no blueprint for this before. What do you do when you're picked to be essentially like the leader of Black America at the age of 27? What do you do next? That had to be really stressful.
But let's connect it together, right? Let's go into the youth. Let's talk about the use of the young people at that time, and even to this day, SNCC and a lot of other organizations, and them using high school kids, college kids, stuff like that, and the moxie they brought to the movement, and it wasn't tied down to dogma and stuff like that. And really spearhead some things. Talk about the use of the young people and the importance of the youth in these movements.
Yeah, so important. And it's interesting because, after Montgomery, King is struggling a little bit. He tries to lead campaigns that are similar to the Montgomery in places like Albany, Georgia, and St. Augustine, Florida, and it's not going well. But the youth is starting to pick up on what he did and copy it and do it their own way. So the youth are sitting in at lunch counters all over the South, and King's not involved in that, but he offers himself. He goes to their meetings and says, I'm not going to take over your movement for you, but if you need me, let me know what I can do. And then you start to see these young people riding the buses in the South, the Freedom Riders. And once again, King's not on the buses, but he's there when they need him, and he's learning from them. That's what I love about King, is that he doesn't feel like he has to take over. He doesn't feel like he has to be the boss. He's not going to tell them what to do, but he's also listening to them, and he's adapting his own approach based on what they're bringing to the movement. And it's the young people who go out and educate voters, get them signed up, registered to vote, who start teaching nonviolence. So King is really respectful of what young people bring to the movement. It's one of the reasons that he's so great, is that he's not trying to Bigfoot anybody.
No, not at all. And it's powerful because back to the young people were the ones actually going through the brutality. John Lewis, hearing his early stories, like, man, he went through so much. So going back to the speech at the Washington, the March on Washington, what he wanted to say and write, because he had so many visceral experiences. He had a lot of vitriol in his speech because he had what he had went through, physically.
Yeah, no, that's right. And it's one of the really injustices that we've done to King, is that we think of him as just this Mr. I Have a Dream, and this almost conservative figure, but he was a radical. And the first half of that speech was really radical. And then we've done that. He didn't do that. We've kind of dumbed down his message because we want to just stick to the safe stuff. We want to stick to the stuff that makes us comfortable. But King didn't do that. In fact, he got more and more radical. I think he was a radical all along, but he got more and more radical. He came to Chicago and spoke out on Northern racism, started speaking out on the Vietnam War, started talking about income inequality, started talking about police brutality and reparations. So, we need to remember that, King spoke hard truths, and it's not his fault that we tend to just stick to the easy ones that we want to hear, the ones we want to hear most.
Yeah. Okay, so you said about him being more radical as time went on. Let's go directly into the whole Malcolm X King dynamic. It's kind of like a Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, right? You can't do a Bird book and not mention Magic. at some point. So tell me, in your opinion, even from afar, how do you think that they impacted each other, even from a distance, even? How did they impact each other? You think, in your opinion, in your findings?
First, I
From
got
your,
to ask you which one's magic and which one's bird.
I think that Malcolm X is Larry Bird, and MLK is Magic. He got the smile, the smile, the charisma, and the people like him, ladies love him, that kind
I
of stuff.
love it. That's great. Um, it's real. They are constant rivals in a way, and but they're playing the same game and they're playing in the same league, and their goals are really the same, right? So maybe the magic Larry Bird thing is a good analogy. But what's interesting to me is that first of all, remember that King is significantly younger than Malcolm. We don't think of him that way. Um, and Malcolm is is really mostly doing the trash talking, which makes him more like Larry Bird. And, and Malcolm is the one who's like attacking King because it makes Malcolm look tougher. It makes him look like the more radical alternative. And people, he's saying to people, and to white and black people, if you don't listen to Dr. King, you're gonna have to deal with me, and you're not gonna like dealing with me. And that really appeals to his core audience because that makes him look like, he's a dangerous person, and he's saying that he thinks King is wasting his time negotiating with white America, negotiating with politicians, that white Americans are never going to give up power voluntarily, and integration is a waste of time. So Malcolm is really preaching this much more radical message, but King is not really talking trash back at him. I think King respects the fact that they're
Yeah,
both interested in black dignity primarily, and that they're just coming about it from different ways.
yeah, yeah. And we all know about King and Malcolm meeting at one time and shaking hands. And I never knew that Martin sat down with Elijah Muhammad though until this book. I never knew
Yeah,
that he had to sit down with Elijah Muhammad. That was incredible to me to even hear that.
yeah, it was fascinating. I don't think King agreed with much of what Elijah Muhammad was saying, but once again,
Right.
he recognized that all of these people, including like the more radicals, including people like Stokely Carmichael, that they all had something to say about black dignity, and that he didn't agree with their calls for violence, but he saw some fundamental commonalities. And I just want to mention one more thing. The media was interested in dividing these men, and certainly the FBI was interested in dividing these men too, and they succeeded in that. And one of the shocking things I discovered in my research for this book is that Playboy magazine and Alex Haley made up a quote from King when asked about what he thought about Malcolm X, and this quote was repeated over and over. It's been in textbooks, it's been in dozens of books, and it was completely fabricated by Playboy magazine and Alex Haley, the writer who interviewed King. I got a hold of Haley's original notes from the interview,
Wow.
and in that
Wow.
interview, he's asked, "What do you think about Malcolm X?" And King says, "Listen, I don't think I have all the answers. I don't agree with everything Malcolm says, but I think we're working toward the same goals." And that's not what they printed. They printed a quote saying, Malcolm X's fiery demagogic oratory brings nothing but pain and suffering to the black community. So that just goes to
Mm.
show you that King and Malcolm might have found a lot more opportunity to work together,
Yeah.
if they weren't constantly being divided, and if people weren't out to assassinate them both.
Um, I love talking about books and movies going together so much on my platform. And right now, for those on Hulu and Disney Plus, MLKX, right? I love that. Based on Dr. Pioneer Joseph, The Sword and the Shield. I love that book. I'm always talking about that book. I love him. But seeing it on film, when they show that moment where Malcolm is seeing Martin on the Time magazine cover at a bus station or something, like just imagining what he was thinking. And then Martin seeing Malcolm when the whole documentary thing came out. Like, I never imagined that until they showed it on film like that. What those guys probably was thinking in those moments about each other, That was just an amazing shot on film, you know.
Yeah, I've only seen the first episode of that show so far, but I
Oh,
think it's
really?
very well done. I haven't caught
Oh,
up to the latest
well, guess
episodes
what,
yet.
Mr. Jonathan? You got to catch up. I
I
think
got
you
some
would like
homework
it.
to do. I know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you would like it. Let's go into the FBI. FBI, CIA, all the alphabets. J. Edgar Hoover. And just how obsessed this man was with these black leaders and trying to take down the black messiah, if you will. And him pretty much like going through all this, going above any protocols, like just doing whatever he wants, like a cowboy, if you will. Talk about J. Edgar Hoover for a minute and what he did destroying these movements and these people.
Well, J. Edgar Hoover saw himself as being the protector of the status quo, the white uh, Christian nationalist power structure, as Lerone Martin describes it in his book. And I think that he saw King as the greatest threat to that, especially once Malcolm was assassinated. But even when Malcolm was still alive, he saw that King had the most potential to unite the masses, black and white, that people would follow him and listen to him, and they might create a movement that really forced the country to change. That's why, the day after the March on Washington, right? It's the peak of King at his greatest power. This is the moment where King really shows what the nation could become on live television. And the next day, the FBI declares that because of King's speech at the March on Washington, because he has this dream, we must now view him as the most dangerous man in America when it comes to race. That's their conclusion. Not that America might finally be turning a corner, that we might be ready to put our racist past behind us. That's what most Americans are saying when they watch this scene on television. But our FBI says, no, this is dangerous. Why is it dangerous? It's only dangerous if you don't want to give up the power that you've been hoarding for hundreds of years.
Right. And now we can go straight into like the actual assassination, right? Now, after all your combing and documents, is there like a real definitive answer on like what happened that day? Like who, what, why, when, all the details? Because like in the book you read on King, there's so many conspiracies out there, so many twists to it. Just like Malcolm X, just like Tupac Shakur, like Biggie Smalls, like all of these bigger than life guys. There's so many stories as to what really took place in the details of it.
Yeah, the answer is no. We still don't really have a definitive answer. And a lot of people I talked to, including, some very smart people, still believe that this was a conspiracy, that James Earl Ray did not act alone, that someone put him up to it, someone helped him plan it, someone helped him escape. I don't know. And I didn't look into it like to the degree that I researched King's life. I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole because others have already gone down that rabbit hole and come up with nothing. And I think also what's most important about the assassination and the motivation for the assassination is the fact that our government created the conditions, knowingly created the conditions that might make somebody want to take him out by creating this perception that he was an enemy of the state, that he was a threat, that he was a liar. Then you know that you are increasing the chance that somebody's going to think that it's their patriotic duty to assassinate him. The FBI knew all that. Whether they actually ordered the assassination is almost irrelevant at that point.
They put all the ingredients in the pot, all the wheels in motion. Then they try to hide their hand. Like, man,
we didn't stir it, right? They did stir it.
Right. Yes, sir. So the reception of the book, what was your expected reception to the book whenever you put it out? And more importantly for me, how did the family receive this book? When they finally got it, they read it, they saw it. What did the family think about it?
I didn't know what to expect from the book. As I said earlier, I was worried that some people might not want to read a book about the human king. They might just prefer to stick with the monument, but the reception has been fantastic. As you mentioned earlier, Obama read it and put it on his summer list. It was a New York Times bestseller for 4 weeks or something like that. It's starting to get some awards. It's been just incredible. And I've been all over the country talking to audiences. I spoke at a sold out Apollo Theater. I spoke to 1,500 undergraduates at Morehouse, and it's been amazing. I'm having the time of my life.
Living the dream.
The book has been received like better than I ever could have imagined. Like I really am just honored that people are connecting with King again in a new and more emotional way. That's just it's just an honor to play a part in that. As for the family, I haven't heard from the kids. I've heard from some nieces, nephews, cousins. I've heard from some of King's closest associates, like Andrew Young and Jesse Jackson. But I haven't heard from the kids. So his son Dexter just passed away a couple weeks
I was
ago.
gonna say that. Yes, sir.
So he's got 2 children still living, and I hope they've read the book, but I don't know.
Now, let's speak about that real brief if you can. After his assassination and everything, like the way in which his brother died, which is mysterious, and then was his mother got killed at church?
Yeah, his mother was assassinated. Yeah,
it was some strange, weird deaths around his family after his death. And once again, just like Malcolm, there was some different deaths that happened, like in the whole family tree, where it's like this is weird. Even like the Shakur family, right? The same thing with Tupac and them. It's these figures and what happens to their families, not just them after them, is always weird to me.
Yeah, it's tragic. It's certain families seem to be surrounded by these tragedies, and it just spreads from one to another. I don't think there's anything suspicious about the death of King's mother or his brother, but it's just sad that one family had to suffer so much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So you mentioned taking 5+ years writing these books. Who are you writing about next? That's one of my closing questions. Who's next on a 5-year mission?
I haven't decided yet. I've got a couple of candidates, but I haven't decided. It's tough. It's tough to follow King. I don't know that I'm ever going to write about anybody as important or as exciting, but I'm going to try. I'm going to keep trying to come up with the biggest, best stories I can.
Okay. So you're a Chicago guy, I see. Should be a trick question, but I know what you're probably going to say. Quick question, pizza. Who has the best pizza? You travel a lot. You're all around the country. Who has the best, hands down, pizza?
NYC, New York. Yeah, I grew up in New York. I grew up in New York. But Chicago pizza is not pizza, in my opinion. That deep dish stuff should have a different name. They shouldn't call it pizza. I like it, but they shouldn't call it pizza. You're going to get me in trouble now.
You better watch out. You better watch out, man. Hey, Mr. Jonathan, I appreciate you saying yes over and over again. I appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Y'all go out there and get King. We could have spoke for hours on this book, as you can tell. We try to condense it down, respect time, but go out there and get King. It's an amazing book. I'll be talking about this for years to come. I'll be recommending King, man. Thank you very much. I appreciate the audience. I love y'all so much. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Sean.